In 1923, rescue ships found something impossible on Wrangel Island. A woman, alive, alone for 2 years in the Arctic. 4 men had vanished. She remained. This isn't a story about luck. This is a story about what happens when every choice becomes life or death, and no one's coming to save you. Ada Blackjack was not supposed to be on Wrangel Island. In 1921, she was a 23-year-old seamstress in Nome, Alaska, raising a sick child alone. Money wasn't scarce, it was flat out gone. Her son needed medical treatment she couldn't afford. When men arrived recruiting for an Arctic expedition, she listened without hope. They needed a cook and seamstress. The pay was decent. The danger was real. She had never camped, never survived anything except poverty. The expedition leader spoke confidently about claiming Wrangel Island for Britain. He mentioned territorial importance and scientific discovery. He didn't mention that the island had killed previous explorers. He didn't mention that supply ships might not reach them. He spoke of adventure. Ada heard wages. She signed the contract knowing she was unqualified. 4 men would accompany her, young men, confident men, men who had read about survival but never faced it. They packed rifles, navigation tools, and optimism. Ada packed needle and thread. The ship departed in September 1921. Ice already thickened in the northern waters. The captain warned them about timing. Winter came early this far north. If the island became inaccessible, rescue would wait until the following summer, maybe longer. The men nodded. They didn't have a clue what maybe longer actually meant. When Wrangel Island appeared on the horizon, it looked like every other frozen wasteland. Flat, white, featureless. The ship could not approach closely. Ice blocked the route. They transferred to smaller boats and rowed through freezing water toward shore. Ada stepped onto the island on September 15, 1921. She wouldn't leave for nearly 2 years. And she wouldn't leave with the men who brought her there. The camp was established with false confidence. Tents went up quickly. Supplies were stacked and inventoried. The men divided responsibilities and created schedules. Everything felt organized. Everything felt temporary. They expected a supply ship within months. That expectation shaped every decision. They rationed carelessly. They hunted casually. They burned fuel freely. Ada prepared meals from shrinking stores. She repaired torn clothing. She watched the men argue about leadership while dodging the tough work. Nobody wanted to admit the island was harsher than anticipated. Winter arrived with absolute darkness. The sun disappeared in November and did not return. Temperature dropped so severely that exposed skin froze in seconds. Wind became a constant enemy, tearing at shelters and stealing warmth from bodies faster than fires could replace it. Hunting became desperate. The men went out for days and came back with zilch. Seals avoided the area. Birds had migrated. Polar bears circled the camp, dangerous and starving themselves. Ammunition dwindled. Every missed shot mattered. Food supplies shrank visibly. By January 1922, scurvy symptoms appeared. Gums bled. Joints ached. Fatigue deepened beyond what sleep could cure. The men moved slower, argued more, ate less. Ada stayed functional. She didn't know why.
Maybe her body tolerated deprivation better. Maybe she just flat out refused to acknowledge weakness. No supply ship arrived that summer. Ice blocked the routes completely. The men scanned the horizon daily, watching for sails that never appeared. Hope turned to frustration. Frustration turned to fear. By autumn 1922, reality became unavoidable. They were stranded. Food wouldn't last another winter. Rescue wasn't coming. Someone had to leave the island and find help. But leaving meant crossing 60 miles of unstable sea ice to reach Siberia, in winter, with limited supplies. It was suicide. 3 men volunteered anyway.
In January 1923, 3 men prepared to leave. They packed light, way too light. They took minimal food, figuring they'd reach the Siberian coast quickly. They carried rifles for hunting along the way. They studied maps that showed distance, but not conditions. Ada watched as they prepared. She said nothing. What could she say? Stay and starve, or leave and possibly die. There were no good choices. One man stayed behind, Lorne Knight. He was already too weak to travel. Scurvy had damaged him severely. His legs could barely support his weight. He needed constant care. The 3 men left on January 28, 1923. They walked across the ice toward the horizon. Ada watched until they disappeared. She didn't wave. She didn't hope. She knew the odds. Days passed, then weeks. They never came back. Ada cared for Knight as his condition worsened. She boiled water. She rationed the last food. She changed his bedding. She listened to him speak about rescue ships that were not coming. By June, Knight couldn't even stand. His body was shutting down completely. Ada fed him by hand. She kept him warm. She did everything possible. It wasn't enough. Knight died on June 23, 1923. Ada buried him alone in frozen ground. There was no ceremony, no one to speak words. She dug as deeply as the earth allowed and covered him with rocks and ice. When she finished, she stood and looked at the empty camp. She was completely alone on Wrangel Island. Nobody knew she was alive. Nobody was coming. And winter would be back in 3 months. Ada Blackjack had 2 choices: learn to survive alone or wait to die. She chose survival. But survival required skills she didn't have. She'd never hunted successfully. She didn't know how to shoot straight. She was terrified of polar bears and had good reason to be. She started with what she could control. She organized the remaining supplies. She inventoried every item. She calculated how long food would last if she ate minimally. The answer was not long enough. She had to hunt. Ada took Knight's rifle. It was heavy, unfamiliar. She had fired it only a few times. She walked to areas where seals sometimes appeared. She waited for hours in freezing cold. She missed her first shots, and her next, and the ones after. Ammunition was limited. Every wasted bullet brought her closer to starvation. She studied the seals. She learned their patterns. She learned to wait for closer shots. She learned to control her breathing before pulling the trigger. She killed her first seal in July 1923. It wasn't pretty, it wasn't easy, but it was food. She taught herself to skin the animal, to preserve the meat, to use every part. The process took hours. Her hands cramped, her back ached, but she learned. Survival became a series of small, brutal lessons. She learned which ice would support her weight. She learned how to repair the shelter when storms damaged it. She learned to start fires in wind that wanted to extinguish them. Polar bears tested her constantly. They approached the camp, curious and hungry. Ada learned to make noise, to appear larger, to shoot near them without wasting bullets on killing shots she might miss. One bear circled the camp for days. Ada didn't sleep a wink. She kept the rifle ready. She watched through gaps in the tent. The bear eventually took off. She never figured out why. She developed routines because routines gave structure to emptiness. Wake, check traps, repair equipment, hunt if possible, eat sparingly, sleep lightly. She spoke aloud sometimes, not to anyone, just to hear human language. Her own voice reminded her she was still alive, still human. Months passed. Summer ended. Autumn arrived. Winter returned. She survived.
Isolation doesn't announce itself. It sneaks up on you. By her second winter alone, Ada noticed changes she could not control. Her thoughts circled repetitively. She forgot what day it was. She forgot what month. Time became meaningless. She marked days when she remembered, but the marks blurred. Was it October? November? She couldn't tell. It didn't matter. Injuries happened without witnesses. Once she fell through thin ice while checking traps. The water was so cold it knocked the breath out of her. She dragged herself out, not sure how. Her clothes froze solid. She stumbled back to camp and stripped them off with hands that had quit working properly. She survived that. She didn't know how. Another time frostbite damaged her toes. She could not feel them for days. When sensation returned, the pain was extraordinary. She wrapped them and continued working because stopping meant dying. The island became her entire world. She knew every ridge, every dangerous area, every shelter from wind. Familiarity didn't bring comfort. It brought a brutal certainty about how limited her options were. She stopped thinking about rescue. Hope was expensive. It consumed energy she needed for survival. But isolation cracked something deeper than hope. Language thinned. She spoke less, even to herself. When she did speak, words felt strange, foreign. Sometimes she could not remember the name for common objects. She would stare at her rifle and search for the word. It would come eventually, but slower. She wondered if she was forgetting how to be human. She wondered if it mattered. The worst moments came at night. Darkness stretched forever. Wind hammered against the tent. Cold pressed inward. She lay awake and understood how small she was, how irrelevant. The island didn't give a damn if she lived. The ocean didn't notice her struggle. She was utterly, completely alone. And yet, she didn't quit. She could have. It would have been easier. She could have walked onto the ice and let the cold take her. She could have stopped fighting. She didn't. Something stubborn in her refused to disappear. Spring came again in 1923. Ice began breaking. Open water appeared. If a ship was coming, it would come now. Ada scanned the horizon, hating herself for hoping.
On August 20th, 1923, Ada saw something impossible. A ship. She stared at it,
certain her mind was inventing hope. But the ship remained. It moved closer. It was real. Ada didn't run toward the shore. She'd learned caution. Isolation had taught her to distrust easy things. She watched the ship approach. Boats lowered. Men rowed toward the island. When they landed, they stopped moving. They stared. Ada understood what they were seeing. She hadn't seen her reflection in 2 years, but she knew she'd changed. Her clothes were animal skins she'd sewn herself. Her hair was long and matted. Her face was weathered way beyond her 25 years. She moved differently, carefully, like someone who'd learned that mistakes killed. She looked like the island had remade her. The men approached slowly. They spoke. Their words sounded strange, too fast, too loud. They asked where the others were. Ada pointed toward the grave. She explained briefly. 3 men left. They never came back. Night died. She was alone. The men struggled to believe her. A woman, alone, for nearly 2 years in the Arctic. They helped her onto the ship. She moved stiffly, her body shaped by survival rather than comfort. They offered her food. She ate slowly. Her stomach had forgotten abundance. As the ship pulled away from Wrangel Island, Ada looked back. The island remained, flat, white, indifferent. It had tried to kill her. It failed. She was leaving, finally. But what she was heading back to, she didn't yet know.
Ada Blackjack returned to Nome in September 1923. There was no celebration, no recognition, no understanding of what she had endured. Instead, there were questions, accusations. People wanted to know why she survived when the men did not. They implied she had done something wrong or something cowardly. The expedition had failed, and someone had to be blamed. Ada didn't defend herself loudly. She answered questions simply. She survived because she learned, because she refused to quit, because she had zero choice. The money she earned went toward her son's care, as intended. She didn't write books. She didn't give lectures. She didn't turn her survival into a paycheck. History treated her as a footnote, an inconvenient survivor in a failed expedition. The men who died were remembered as explorers. Ada was remembered as lucky. But luck doesn't teach you to hunt. Luck doesn't keep you alive through 2 Arctic winters alone. Luck doesn't force you to bury the dead and keep going. Ada Blackjack survived because survival was the only option she refused to abandon. She didn't conquer the Arctic, she outlasted it. She endured isolation, hunger, fear, and absolute silence. She did it without witnesses, without encouragement, without knowing if it even mattered. And when rescue finally showed up, she didn't demand recognition. She just went home. Because survival was never about glory. It was about living, one day, then another, until the days added up to years, and the woman everyone expected to die remained standing. That is the story of Ada Blackjack, not a hero, not a victim, a survivor. And sometimes that is the most extraordinary thing a person can be.